For years, you treated me as nobody. Tonight, you will remember my name.
My name is David Chen. I am 37 years old, and if I had to sum up my defining trait, it would be this. I observe more than I speak. Silence has always been my chosen language, not because I lack words, but because I have long believed that true power comes from listening. Growing up on Boston's South Shore in a working-class neighborhood taught me that the loudest voices rarely carried the most wisdom. In my world, you learned more by watching carefully than by barging into conversations. I discovered early that people reveal themselves in what they don't say, the pauses, the sideways glances, the weight carried in a sigh. Those lessons stayed with me. They shaped my character, my work, and ultimately, the path that led me to both love and loss. Sarah, my former wife, came from a very different environment. Her family was the embodiment of Boston's old aristocracy. Families whose fortunes stretched back generations, who defined themselves by their surnames and the institutions they supported. They lived in a world of inherited wealth, multi-generational trust funds, and annual charity galas where appearances mattered more than authenticity. To them, refinement wasn't a trait you developed. It was an inheritance you either possessed or lacked entirely. Our marriage lasted 8 years, but in truth, I never stopped feeling like a visitor passing through a museum of polished manners and rigid expectations. I was tolerated but never welcomed, an outsider who could never quite bridge the gap between their world and mine. Her mother, Patricia, made her disdain unmistakable from the very first moment. She specialized in the sort of comments that carried razor blades under layers of civility. She never outright insulted me, but she didn't need to. Every carefully chosen remark communicated that I was not enough. Not in pedigree, not in status, not in the invisible codes that governed her social circles. Sarah's sister Jessica was blunter, her cruelty dressed in elegance. With her sculpted cheekbones and tailored wardrobe, she thrived on reminding me of my place. At nearly every family gathering, she would tilt her head, smile sweetly, and remark how quaint it was that I still had to work for a living, unlike the collection of trust fund heirs who floated effortlessly around her. Their laughter was champagne sparkling, brittle and hollow, but it carried the sting of superiority. I endured all of it for years in silence. I told myself that love was stronger than background noise, that Sarah chose me for who I was, not for what I lacked. But 2 nights before her father's retirement gala, my illusions collapsed with a single conversation I can still replay frame by frame. She was seated at her antique vanity, bathed in warm lamplight, applying lipstick with the precision of a surgeon. Her reflection glowed in the mirror, a portrait of elegance and poise. Without even looking at me, she spoke casually, her tone as indifferent as if she were discussing tomorrow's weather. "David, please don't embarrass us tomorrow night." The words hit me with a cold finality. At first, I thought I misheard her. When I asked her what she meant, she finally turned, her eyes cool and deliberate, her expression heavy with the kind of pity reserved for someone beneath notice. "You are a good man," she said evenly, "but you don't belong in their world. Not tomorrow, not at this level of event." Then she stood, her silk dress whispering against the floor, and crossed to the dresser. From it, she retrieved a tie, a beige, lifeless strip of fabric so dull it seemed designed to erase the existence of whoever wore it. She held it out to me with an air of authority. "Wear this," she said. "It's safe." That word echoed inside me. Safe. It didn't mean reliable or respectable. It meant invisible. It meant blend into the wallpaper, swallow your voice, exist only as a shadow. It meant exactly what her family had always wanted from me, to fade into the background so their performance of power and prestige could unfold uninterrupted. In that moment, I realized with brutal clarity that to Sarah, I had never been more than an accessory, someone useful as long as I remained quiet, polished, and forgettable. But what she never realized, what none of them ever suspected, was that for the past 3 years, I had been the one keeping her father's company from disintegrating entirely. Sterling Healthcare Group, the empire Richard had built over 4 decades, was crumbling behind its glossy facade. On paper, it looked stable, even prosperous. But behind the curtain, the reality was catastrophic. Reckless acquisitions that drained capital, business strategies decades out of date, regulatory troubles stacking like a house of cards, and investors fleeing in waves. Each month, the company's stock hemorrhaged value, bleeding out like a wound that would not clot. Richard, proud and unyielding, refused to acknowledge the truth. His arrogance prevented him from asking for help, and his pride blinded him to the looming collapse of everything he had created. That was where I stepped in, though never openly as myself. I constructed a web of shell companies, hidden holding firms, and carefully veiled equity channels, all under the umbrella of my investment group, Chen Capital Management. Through this labyrinth, I began the quiet, methodical process of taking control. It was not quick. It was not simple. It took 18 relentless months of careful maneuvering, sleepless nights, and strategic gambles. I fought off 3 aggressive buyout firms and 1 European conglomerate that circled like hunters, waiting to strip the company for parts. Every move was deliberate. Proxy votes shifted quietly. Board seats rotated into the hands of allies. Control, piece by piece, passed into my grasp until the company had a new lifeline, one its founder never even realized existed. And I did not do this for vengeance. I didn't care about humiliating Richard or proving Sarah's family wrong. My motives were simpler and far more personal. I respected the legacy Richard had built. For all his flaws, the man had created something that mattered in the field of medical innovation, technology that had saved lives, treatments that had advanced medicine. I could not stand to watch that legacy dissolve because of arrogance and stubborn pride, so I kept myself hidden. For 3 years, my name never appeared on a single contract filing or record. Even my closest colleagues had no idea of the depth of my involvement. I was invisible by design. I wasn't searching for recognition or applause. What I wanted was control, the kind of control that could preserve what was worth saving, even if the people closest to it never knew whose hands held it together. The final restructuring deal was now complete, the last signature in place, and Sterling finally had the stability it had been missing for years. With the crisis resolved, Richard's longtime business partner, Michael, began pressing for something I had spent years carefully avoiding: a meeting. He wanted to see the face of the mysterious, silent investor who had orchestrated everything. He said, quite plainly, that before Richard's retirement became official and permanent, he needed to shake hands with the man who had, in his words, saved the company's soul. Michael had stood at Richard's side for nearly 30 years. The two men couldn't have been more different. Richard thrived on cameras, applause, and public recognition. He was the one on magazine covers, the keynote speaker at conferences, the charismatic founder. Michael, in contrast, was the backbone. He managed the numbers, the contracts, the day-to-day machinery. He kept relationships steady, ensured the gears kept turning, and quietly shouldered responsibilities Richard barely acknowledged. He had no taste for spotlights, but he had a sharp eye for details. When the company's fortunes suddenly shifted, Michael didn't accept it at face value. He wanted to know where the new current came from. Through a discreet mutual connection, he reached out. He didn't demand documents or names, didn't care about the intricate structures behind it all. What he wanted was clarity. Was this new influence here to preserve Richard's legacy, or simply to strip the company for profit? We met at a private club in Cambridge, a place built for discretion. Heavy drapes, paneled walls, dim lighting, everything designed to swallow secrets whole. I didn't hedge. I told him directly who I was and what I had done. I explained that I wasn't here to dismantle Richard's life's work, but to save it quietly, effectively, without fanfare. Michael listened with the calm patience of a man who had spent his life weighing people. He didn't pry into family connections or ask about personal motives. He simply nodded, raised his glass of whiskey, and said he had watched Richard steer the company into danger for years while no one dared challenge him. If I was the one who had stepped in and kept it alive, then I had his full support. That was all. No questions, no conditions. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake in our wide bed, staring at the ceiling, while Sarah lay beside me, face lit by the glow of her phone screen as she scrolled endlessly through Instagram. She tapped likes on photos of boutiques she would never visit and celebrity chefs she would never meet, completely absorbed, while my mind replayed the past 8 years in sharp detail. I thought about every small humiliation I had quietly absorbed. How she introduced me at family dinners and lavish parties as just David, like I was some minor accessory she'd reluctantly brought along. How she never once asked about my work in detail, never seemed to care about what I was building or how successful it had become. I remembered the night a prominent surgeon called me a successful financier, and Sarah laughed lightly, brushing it aside by saying I just dabbled in investments as a hobby. The man looked puzzled, but she had already moved the conversation on, leaving my years of work dismissed in a single careless remark. Her monthly book club came back to me too, how she'd specifically asked me not to mention my ventures because, as she put it, finance is far too complicated and honestly boring for my friends. I thought about the small gestures she framed as affection but carried an edge. adjusting my collar or straightening my tie in public, not out of love, but as though I were a child who couldn't present himself properly. And worst of all, I remembered the countless times her sister Jessica mocked me, calling it adorable that I actually worked for a living, as if earning a career was beneath them. Sarah never defended me. She never once contradicted Jessica or acknowledged that my work wasn't quaint at all, but real, meaningful, and successful. Instead, she laughed along, letting their narrative stand, while everything I had accomplished remained invisible to the very people who dismissed me. The morning of Richard's retirement party, I found that offensive beige tie deliberately draped over my designated chair like some kind of ominous warning or not-so-subtle reminder of my expected social role. Instead of obediently wearing their chosen uniform, I deliberately selected a deep navy tie with thin, elegant silver diagonal stripes. Not flashy or attention-seeking, but definitely not designed to render me invisible either. At the mandatory family brunch beforehand, with Patricia and Jessica at their exclusive country club, they treated me exactly like an occasionally useful piece of furniture that needed periodic repositioning for optimal room aesthetics. Jessica actually gave a slow, mocking clap when I arrived at their reserved table and announced loudly enough for nearby diners to hear, "Well, look, everyone, he actually showed up on time and he's wearing a reasonably appropriate tie for once." Patricia barely acknowledged my physical presence except to sternly remind me not to speak during the evening's important event, to simply let Richard and Michael handle all the significant conversations with important people. Like I was some kind of dangerous social liability they had to carefully manage and strategically contain throughout the evening. During that torturous brunch, I sat quietly while they discussed the evening's logistics. The guest list, the flower arrangements, the photographer they'd hired, the specific table assignments designed to maximize networking opportunities. I might as well have been invisible. They talked around me, through me, about me, but never to me. At one point, Patricia gestured vaguely in my direction while speaking to the waiter and said, "He'll have the fruit salad. Nothing too complicated." I hadn't even looked at the menu yet. The actual retirement party was held at the city's most incredibly upscale hotel ballroom downtown. Massive crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light, pristine ivory linens on every surface, elaborate white orchid centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, a professional jazz trio positioned strategically in the corner, uniformed waiters gliding silently around the room with silver trays of champagne flutes and ridiculously expensive hors d'oeuvres. It represented elegance dressed in absolute ice, visually stunning but emotionally cold, impressively sophisticated, but completely unwelcoming to anyone outside their inner circle. The guest list read like a corporate who's who directory. Medical executives, prominent surgeons, political figures, investment brokers, even a few celebrity donors to Richard's Hospital Foundation. 200 of Boston's most influential people, all dressed in their finest evening wear, all speaking in carefully modulated tones that conveyed education, breeding, and inherited wealth. I positioned myself near the ornate bar area, quietly observing while Sarah worked the crowded room with her absolutely trademark social grace, air-kissing prominent cheeks and laughing melodiously at precisely the right conversational moments, while her family subtly but clearly pointed me out to their curious friends. I caught Patricia gesturing discreetly in my general direction to a tight circle of expensively dressed women, and they all leaned in conspiratorially with those perfectly polished, genuinely cruel smiles before erupting in delicate, absolutely vicious laughter. The specific kind of laughter that cuts straight through your chest, even from across an enormous, crowded room. I watched Sarah glide from table to table like she was performing a carefully choreographed dance. She knew exactly how long to spend with each group, exactly what compliments to offer, exactly when to excuse herself gracefully. She was absolutely in her element, commanding attention and respect in a way that seemed effortless, but was actually the result of decades of careful training and social conditioning. At one point during the cocktail hour, I tried to join a conversation near the sponsor tables. A group of medical administrators were discussing healthcare policy changes, something I actually knew quite a bit about given my involvement in the industry. But the moment I opened my mouth to contribute, Sarah appeared at my elbow with a gentle but firm touch. "Darling, could you grab me a fresh glass of wine? This one seems to have gone a bit warm." It wasn't a request. It was a polite dismissal, executed so smoothly that the other conversation participants barely noticed. But I noticed. I always noticed. Then Michael arrived, and I swear the entire atmospheric energy of that ballroom shifted dramatically and unmistakably. This wasn't just another well-dressed guest making a fashionably late entrance. This was someone who commanded immediate, genuine respect from absolutely everyone in attendance, including Richard himself. Conversations naturally slowed throughout the room. Heads turned almost unconsciously. People instinctively moved out of his determined path as he entered the ballroom with an aura of quiet, undeniable authority that you simply can't fake or purchase. Even Richard, who had been holding court at the center of the room, paused mid-sentence when Michael walked in. There was something about Michael's presence that demanded attention, not through volume or ostentation, but through sheer competence and earned respect. He moved like a man who had built his reputation through decades of solid results rather than inherited privilege. He methodically scanned the crowded room, located me standing alone by the bar, and walked directly toward my position with this broad, completely genuine smile spreading across his distinguished face. No hesitation whatsoever. No polite stopping to greet other prominent people first. Just a purposeful, unwavering beeline straight to exactly where I was standing. I could feel the room's energy shift as people noticed Michael's deliberate approach. Conversations quieted slightly, heads turned subtly in our direction. In their world, who Michael chose to greet first sent a clear signal about importance and influence. "Genuinely good to see you, sir," he says warmly, gripping my hand firmly with real warmth and unmistakable professional respect. Then he deliberately raises his voice just enough for everyone in our immediate vicinity to hear clearly. "Everyone, I want you to meet David Chen, the remarkable man who made tonight's celebration actually possible." You could have heard the proverbial pin drop in that enormous ballroom. 200 of Boston's most important people just completely froze mid-conversation, mid-sip, mid-laugh. The silence became so complete and suffocating it felt almost physically oppressive. Sarah abruptly stopped walking across the marble floor, her designer heels catching slightly on the expensive carpet as she turned to stare in obvious confusion. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the shock spreading across her features. Her father, Richard, who had been laughing boisterously at the main sponsor table just seconds before, went completely and utterly silent. Patricia's champagne glass tilted dangerously in her suddenly unsteady hand. Jessica immediately started whispering frantically and urgently to the woman positioned next to her, both of them shooting rapid glances in my direction like I was some exotic animal that had suddenly materialized in their familiar habitat. But Michael definitely wasn't finished with his announcement. He continued speaking, his authoritative voice carrying clearly across the hushed ballroom. Without David's intervention and expertise, Sterling Healthcare Group wouldn't exist anymore as we know it. Those mysterious, anonymous investors who completely restructured the failing company 2 years ago and literally saved all your jobs? That was David Chen and his firm, Chen Capital Management, working entirely behind the scenes. The profound silence somehow managed to get even deeper and more uncomfortable. I watched Sarah's carefully composed face cycle rapidly through obvious confusion, growing disbelief, acute embarrassment, then something unmistakably approaching social panic. Her meticulously constructed public persona was visibly cracking in real time before everyone's eyes. Michael placed his left hand over our joined handshake like a seal of approval and continued. "You remember those anonymous investors Richard partnered with during the supply chain crisis? The ones who proposed the pivot to digital health technologies? That wasn't some faceless hedge fund or European conglomerate. That was David, working quietly to preserve everything Richard built while asking for nothing in return." Richard slowly approached our small group, still desperately trying to mentally process what he had just heard announced publicly. His usual confident stride had become uncertain, almost fragile. He started uncertainly, his normally commanding voice now weak and confused. "You were personally behind the entire financial restructuring operation?" I nodded calmly and extended my hand in a gesture of respect. "From the very beginning, sir. It's genuinely a pleasure to finally meet you properly and openly." Michael then addressed the entire assembled room like he was delivering an important toast. This man could have easily taken full public credit at any point during the past 3 years, but he deliberately chose to work completely behind the scenes without recognition. Tonight, while we absolutely should honor Richard's impressive 4 decades of dedicated leadership and genuine innovation in healthcare, let's also properly recognize the person who ensured there would still be a meaningful legacy left to celebrate. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people started clapping hesitantly, others nodded with dawning recognition. I caught glimpses of surprise from across the room. Some faces frowning in confusion as they tried to connect dots they'd never seen before. others blinking in rapid realization as pieces of gossip and speculation suddenly clicked into place. One distinguished gentleman near the bar raised his glass toward me with a knowing grin. Apparently, he'd been wondering about the mysterious restructuring for months. Jessica was whispering furiously to her husband, who looked like he'd been handed an unexpected tax audit. Patricia hadn't moved a muscle, frozen like a statue with her mouth slightly open. Suddenly, almost like a dam had burst. Everyone wanted to talk to me immediately. Prominent board members, distinguished doctors, hospital executives, influential investment brokers, political figures, people who had literally walked directly past me at previous social events without a single second glance were now eagerly lining up to shake my hand and pepper me with detailed questions about my absolutely brilliant restructuring strategy and my truly visionary approach to healthcare investment and management. Mr. Chen, I had no idea, said one of Richard's longtime colleagues, offering a firm handshake. Brilliant work, truly brilliant. We all thought Michael had brought in some private European investors. Just a small firm, I replied humbly. Right place, right time. But the strategy, the pivot to remote diagnostics, that was your vision, another executive pressed. That saved thousands of jobs. Collaborative effort, I said. Michael and I worked closely together. I wasn't interested in basking in applause, but I also didn't shy away from the recognition. Not anymore. I'd earned their respect through results, not through inheritance or social connections, and that felt genuinely satisfying in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Sarah approached me looking completely shell-shocked, like someone had just attempted to explain advanced quantum physics to her in a completely foreign language. You never told me any of this, she whispered desperately, her voice barely audible above the resumed conversations buzzing all around us. You never asked, I replied simply and honestly, without any trace of anger or accusation in my tone. She tried desperately explaining how she genuinely thought she was protecting me from her family's sometimes harsh social judgment, how she was sincerely trying to shield me from their occasionally cruel social dynamics and class-based criticism. But I gently cut her off. You weren't actually protecting me, Sarah. You were systematically managing me like a potential liability, constantly trying to force me to fit into their narrow, predetermined expectations instead of ever allowing me to simply be myself. The lengthy car ride home afterward was completely and utterly silent. Neither of us knew how to bridge the enormous gap that had suddenly opened between us. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring out the passenger window at the dark Boston streets, while I focused on the road ahead. The engine hummed quietly between us, but the emotional distance felt vast and possibly unbridgeable. Back at our house, she finally had her complete emotional breakdown in our designer kitchen, still wearing that expensive silver gown that now seemed to hang on her frame like an elaborate costume she had forgotten to remove after the performance ended. I didn't fully realize how much I was systematically silencing you, she admitted through genuine tears that smeared her carefully applied makeup. I honestly thought I was helping you successfully navigate their complicated social world, helping you blend in seamlessly and avoid their predictable criticism and judgment. I told her the brutal, unvarnished truth that she had systematically made me feel small, insignificant, and ashamed for years, consistently introduced me at important events like I was an embarrassing social accessory she was stuck with, never once bothered to learn about my actual significant professional accomplishments because they didn't fit neatly into her family's preferred narrative about who I should be and what my role should be in their established social hierarchy. I kept telling myself I was protecting you, she said, her voice breaking, that I was shielding you from their judgments and criticisms. But you never needed protecting, did you? You were already more successful than any of them. When she tearfully asked if our marriage was completely over, I said I honestly didn't know for certain. But I was absolutely done pretending to be significantly less than I actually am, just to make other people feel comfortable, superior, and secure in their assumptions about social hierarchies and inherited worth. I moved out the following week. Not dramatically with slammed doors and shouted accusations, just quietly and methodically packed my essential belongings and secured my own downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and an unobstructed view of the Charles River. I started going by my actual professional credentials again, instead of passively letting people assume I was some amateur day trader or casual hobby investor. My firm has grown exponentially since then. We're no longer just doing discreet behind-the-scenes acquisitions. We're actively and publicly reshaping entire sectors of the healthcare and technology industries. I actively mentor younger professionals now, Ambitious investors and entrepreneurs who remind me of my former self. Serious, observant, full of intelligent questions and legitimate ambitions who understand that real success comes from competence and results rather than family connections. Sarah kept texting me for months afterward. Long, rambling apologies mixed with increasingly desperate pleas for reconciliation, detailed promises to change her behavior and do better, elaborate explanations of how she finally understood what she had done wrong and how much damage she had caused to our relationship and my self-worth. I read every single message but only replied once, after a particularly late night when I was looking out at the sparkling city lights from my new apartment. You specifically asked me not to embarrass you at the party. I didn't embarrass anyone. I simply revealed who I've always been. A year later, I got the official invitation to join Sterling's board of directors. Not as a hidden name in the background anymore, but as a public voice helping guide the company's growth and future plans. I said yes right away. Not for payback or pride, but because I had truly earned the right to be seen, heard, and respected for what I had done and what I knew. Just last month, Michael sent me a framed photo from that retirement party. It showed the exact moment he introduced me, with every stunned face in the room frozen in disbelief, like a painting of sudden revelation. Sarah, Patricia, Jessica, Richard, all of them caught in that instant of shock and quiet recalculation. I keep that photo on my desk now, not to gloat, but to remind myself of the turning point when I finally stopped hiding who I really was. I don't regret the divorce at all. Sarah wasn't cruel or hateful. She was just stuck in a shallow world where appearances and social rank mattered more than honesty or respect. She thought she was protecting both of us by keeping me small, quiet, and forgettable, so we would fit the rules of their circle. But I saw clearly at last. I'd rather live alone and respected than married and invisible. Now I run my own successful firm, mentor young people who want real advice, and I'm seeing someone who not only asks thoughtful questions about my work, but also proudly shares my wins with her friends, instead of hiding them like they were shameful. It's genuinely amazing how dramatically better life becomes when you completely stop apologizing for taking up space and demanding the basic respect you've legitimately earned through your efforts and achievements. The old me would have obediently worn that boring beige tie and stayed silent in assigned corners forever, accepting their dismissive treatment as the necessary price of belonging to their exclusive world. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can possibly do is simply stop hiding who you really are. Not with explosive anger or theatrical drama, just with quiet, unshakable confidence and an absolute commitment to the truth about yourself and your worth.